Hi everyone, these are the density buffs coming to Nightmare Dungeons near you on August 8th. So we just had this developer Campfire chat here, so you might have heard about this last week. They decided to preview the next patch already, and they had Joe Shaley, the game director, and Joe Papiore, associate game director, and Adam Jackson, the lead class designer here, and they were talking about what's coming. And they showed us a lot of really cool, interesting stuff. So one big change that affects everyone is those Nightmare Dungeon density changes. They didn't say a number, but it does look quite significant. Here's a screenshot of a Nostrava Deepwood, like slay all objectives, so you can see all of the dots on the map. And this looks like at least an increase of something like 20-30% or so to me. I'm sure someone has counted the dots, I didn't do it now. But it looks pretty substantial. So that is number one, a really huge change coming. But they also have really good news for especially Sorcerers, in my opinion, and a bunch of nice buffs for the Barbs, and they also gave a few small things to the other classes. The final patch notes will be previewed on Wednesday, the 2nd of August, so next week we're gonna see that, and they said that there might be like some adjustments, some tweaks, etc., but nothing really substantial. So what we see here, you see here, like they have all the patch notes basically ready. I'm gonna talk through them. You're gonna see them here, and then like a few days later we're gonna have them on the live server for season 1. So yeah, the takeaways are the Nightmare Dungeon buffs, big Sorc and Barb buffs, and a few other tweaks. We're gonna get an extra stash tab as well. Elixir stack more, respec costs are down 40%, and leave dungeon button goes back to 3 seconds, so that's that. They're gonna remove a few Nightmare Dungeon affixes, so Resource Burn, Cold Enchanted, and Backstabbers. I'm a bit surprised about this one. I don't really see the reason. They already nerfed this one heavily, but now it's completely gone. And yeah, Resource Burn, I fully agree. Resource Burn is just annoying, and it's also bugged on top of that. They want to do something about mounts, but I'm not sure actually right now if that is coming in this patch. But they want to make it like more fluid and want to make the boosts actually like overlap and work together, and I think make it better for console players and controller players. Resistances, that is something for Season 2. They just mentioned that briefly that, you know, they're trying to like rebalance them in a way that they're not becoming like super mandatory, and it's not going to be annoying to stack resistances for a certain type. So we'll hear more about that. They talk about VRAM memory issues that have improved, and they're buffing dungeon bosses and butcher and treasure goblins, so they're going to have a guaranteed legendaries now, legion events as well. And apparently like the dungeon boss will also be like beefed up or something. So this is what's coming. But for the Sorc and Barb buffs, there's actually some pretty significant stuff. Key takeaway here is they generally buffed early game a lot, for example through buffing the basic skills or through just buffing some skills generally, and they also buffed a lot of the more underused skills. So they didn't really go for like the meta builds and make them a lot better, but some of those will just be like generally improved from some of those changes. So you can see this here, for example, they changed some of the damage reduction bonuses on the glyphs. So on the Sorc here, there's a bunch of damage reduction glyphs, they are just stronger now. A bunch of damage reduction paragon nodes that are stronger now, so we go from 4% to 5%, and then this can be doubled from the extra paragon bonuses with the stat requirements, and then those could potentially be improved with the glyphs that buff these nodes. So there are like various kind of like stacking small bonuses that just make those classes a bit better. For the Sorcs in particular, there's huge buffs to Fireball in particular, and also Chain Lightning. Personally, I'm quite excited to actually play a Fireball Sorc. So they just got a huge round of buffs there with like the uniques, and the Fireball skill itself was improved. The Azo's Ferocity passive was improved. Some aspects were improved. So that seems to be something that could be really good now. So I'm quite excited for that. Same with Chain Lightning, they buffed the base skill, they buffed the aspects for it, and they buffed like some of the passives here, like Veer's Mastery as well. There's a new legendary aspect coming for the Sorcs as well, that synergizes with the Veer's Mastery, gives you more damage reduction, and lots of like small tweaks here. And outside of that, the Sorcerer survivability has just generally improved now in this patch. So you see this here, there's also more life, for example. So they focused especially on the late game and the Paragon side of things, where you just kind of become a bit more tanky as you go. They also buffed a bunch of legendaries. One highlight here is the gravitational aspect. That's the one for Ball Lightning that previously gave you minus 10% damage and now gives you 25% increased damage. So that's a pretty big swing there. And yeah, a bunch of these other aspects were also improved. For example, the Hydra aspect now gives you increased duration instead of reduced duration. Also applies the enchantment effect. So that could be something now as well. And for example, here Engulfing Flames, that is like one for burning damage. That is like also massively buffed. The aspect of free curses, that was for Meteor, gave you like extra crit damage against healthy targets. And now you always have like some of that bonus. And it also works with Fireball. So that could be really strong now, especially with some of those other changes with Azo's Ferocity. Also some of the Paragon nodes got improved. So that yeah, I have like a lot of crit and a lot of crit damage now on these kind of fire builds. And you can probably feel like this impact of all these stats stacking up. That's going to be pretty interesting to see. There's also a good bunch of other tweaks to other legendary powers. So you see here, for example, the Chain Lightning stuff. You can get up to 4 bonus bounces now. The Chain Lightning resource aspect now gives you mana every time it chains from any target, not just from you. So it's just like generally improved for like AoE pack clear, which is like the one thing that Chain Lightning was really bad on. And it was kind of fine on single target already. So that should be mostly unchanged, but pack clear massively improved. So quite excited to see that one. Frozen Orbit is a little bit buffed with Frozen Orbit aspect. Something like Storm Swirl is buffed. So Snow Veiled now gives you longer Unstoppable and also gives you extra armor, so that could be kind of interesting. And Incendiary also gives you mana when you hit with any pyromancy skills instead of just burning damage. So yeah, lots of these little improvements here and there for some of those aspects, making a lot of them a lot more useful. And the Gloves of the Illuminator, this is the Fireball unique glove that makes fireballs bounce on the ground, so they make them like overlap a lot more now with like this smaller like offset distance per bounce. So you have like a higher chance to hit the same target twice. And also you have a much lower damage penalty now. So it's like a massively buffed unique. I think if you want to play a fireball build, this seems to be kind of the way to go. And let's see what comes out of that. I'm going to try that out once the patch hits. Then we have the Barbarian. So we have a lot of buffs to all of the basic skills. You see here, you get lots more Fury. So this is like especially good for the early game. Especially one thing that Barbarians are really lacking in is the early game. So I think that should make it feel a lot more smooth. And then a bunch of other improvements here. Charge was massively buffed in both damage and the vulnerable uptime. Rupture was buffed a bit. Double Swing, pretty significant buff as well by 25% multiplicatively. So that is actually quite a lot for Double Swing there. Upheaval now gives you berserking on bosses, so that's kind of cool. In general, it seems like they have like this theme of like trying to make skills a little bit better against bosses. So we also saw that in some of the Sorc tweaks as well. I think Azo's Ferocity passive now triggers on bosses, for example. So that is a relatively massive for these fire builds on Sorc. Similar here with the Barbarian. And a bunch of other improvements here. They buffed all of the key passives that are not Unbridled Rage, which is like by far the most used one. So the bleed builds are going to be a bit stronger. The berserking stuff is a bit better. Walking Arsenal is a bit better. So Kratos Barb for the win. And also some nice legendary changes here. So in particular, they said that they're trying to make some of these like flat damage effects a bit more viable in the late game, give them some more scaling, but it's going to be a bit more of like a long-term thing. So they're kind of unhappy that they kind of like fall off really hard at some point, and they're only really good in the early game. For example, the Leap Quake stuff, or some of those other flat damage effects like Arrow Storms on a Rogue, for example. So I imagine we're going to see something for that in the long run. I could imagine probably some glyphs. That would be a really good way of handling that, but we'll see. But for now, there's like buffing these across the board a little bit. They're buffing the charge aspect is introduced. They're buffing a bunch of these resource ones here, like the Unrelenting Fury. And you also get a refund now on bosses. So they have like a much smoother playstyle against bosses. This might also help Barbarians with like Uber Lilith and these kind of things potentially. And they're also buffing a lot of uniques here on the Barbarian. So on the Sorc, there's only the glove. But here we have Fields of Crimson, Hellhammer, Ramaladni, 100,000 Steps, Battle Trance. All of these are massively improved in my opinion. So in some cases they're just like changing one stat to another, like the Ramaladnis, just to make it a bit more desirable, a bit better overall. So they're replacing one kind of bad stat with a good one. So you see this here as well with the Hellhammer. Instead of damage to crowd controlled, it now has crit and these kind of things. Or they're buffing like these flat damage effects to just scale a little bit higher and just give some of these weapons a bit more power overall. So here's also boots that now actually have movement speed, so that's great. I'm not really sure about 100,000 steps, but okay. And Battle Trance actually seems like a really powerful item now. So that is like the Frenzy unique amulet that previously yeah, gave like frenzy ranks and just, you know, potentially allowed some kind of like generator build, but that is not really working out. So they're actually replacing some of those stats here with cooldown reduction, and they're buffing the effect to 45% bonus attack speed to other skills. So that's actually a pretty massive amount of attack speed, and still sticks to the theme of frenzy and fast attacks and stuff. So that is actually a really cool change. I could imagine that being really useful, especially for something like an upheaval kind of like a generator playstyle, where you can make this really huge nuke happen. The other classes got a few changes that are kind of interesting. So starting with the Rogue, slight buff to Invigorating Strike, doesn't really matter. Also Arrow though, every third cast pierces enemies, so that is relatively powerful. So this makes like a full bow rogue without puncture definitely much more viable now. So essentially you can apply vulnerable on every third attack to like a lot of targets at least. So that is very strong. I think False Arrow is going to be a very good generator now. Quite excited to see this. They buffed Caltrops to 5% damage bonus per second instead of 3. I could imagine that being some kind of like a boss killer skill now at least. So we'll see about that. That's going to be quite interesting to play with. Poison Trap a bit improved, mostly for the early game, but it's a pretty substantial buff if you want to make something like that happen. And Rain of Arrows, they actually listened. They may give the knockdown on the first wave now instead of the second. So this is something I was hoping for a long time, and they actually did that, so that's pretty cool. Some other small tweaks here to some passives and legendaries, nothing really substantial in my opinion. Quickening Fog maybe allows you to just like dash around a lot more. There's a lot of ways to get a cooldown reduction for dash now, and I could actually open up some like really fast-paced back and forth playstyle. And they also recently buffed the Shadow Slicer aspect that gives you like this extra dash damage. Could be interesting. And they also buffed two uniques here, Wind Force and Word of Arcane. The Word of Arcane buff is actually really good, especially paired with the recent Preparation buff and this Rain of Arrow buff. And also in the previous patch they buffed Rain of Arrows already. So that is going to be quite nice. I'm actually quite excited to play Rain of Arrows as my second rogue in this season. So we're going to see how that goes. Wind Force, I don't really have much hope right now until they actually change something about the effects. Then we have the Druid changes, kind of similar to the Barbarian. They're beefing up the early game. All of the basic skills are improved. You see here a lot more spirit. So you gain 2 more on Earth Spikes, you gain 1 more here, 1 more there, etc. Kind of nice. And all of the companions are buffed. And companions are especially useful in the early game. So past like level 10, 15 or something when you unlock them. I think they are really good already, and they are buffed even further. So once you get to that level, you kind of like breeze through the early game until you start finding some aspects for other skills, and then play Polarize or play Shred or play Tornado or whatever you find basically, or whatever you want to play. So that is really cool. Just should make the early game a lot smoother on these classes. And they also said that long term they definitely want to investigate these Druid companion builds a little bit more, maybe make them a bit more viable as an alternative to Necromancer playstyles, but we'll see. In terms of legendaries, etc., nothing really big here. So they buffed the Boulder build, I guess. So if you want to play Boulder, it costs less now, deals more damage. That could be interesting. I may try that actually when I make a Druid. Seems kind of fun. I kind of had a Boulder build on my radar, but I expected it not to be that great. Maybe it's much better now. We'll see. And other than that, I mean, Druids are in a really good spot. I think they're the overall best class in the game right now. They didn't really need much help here in this patch. But at least the early game stuff is a really nice improvement. And finally, we have the Necromancer here. So they're buffing Bone Spirit a little bit. They're buffing the Wither Paragon board. So that could be interesting for some of the late game scaling for some builds, especially like the Shadow builds. And they're also buffing a few of these legendary powers here. Some of them very substantially. So the most important one here are Exposed Flesh. So this aspect previously only worked with bone skills, and now all of your skills can have this lucky hit chance to generate essence. And some of those lucky hit effects on Necromancer are extremely potent. For example, the Blighted Corpse Explosion. Like, I think you can actually use this as like some insane essence refill. That's going to be crazy to see in some cases. So quite excited for that one, for the Necromancers. And also some of those other aspects were tuned up here. For example, Aspect of Torment now. The essence regeneration increased from plus 30% to plus 170%. Now, given Necromancers don't have that much base regeneration, but it is definitely going to be really cool to see that you can also have this regeneration buffed to a kind of noticeable level. And another cool buff here, the Grease of the Empty Tomb. This is the Sever unique pair of boots. they have movement speed now, so we don't need to wade through mud anymore as a Necromancer. And they also mentioned that maybe long term they will investigate giving Necromancers a bit more like movement options, not exactly like a movement like or dash teleport kind of skill, but maybe a bit more movement speed here, or some other kind of tools to give them a bit more fluid gameplay basically. One other unique item change that appeared here is Temerity. Temerity is actually a good item now. So they replaced the all stats affix with maximum life, and they made the barrier based on maximum life as well. So previously that was based on base life, not buffed by your maximum life bonuses, for example from rubies or from paragons or from plus maximum life on your gear. So the barrier was generally very small compared to your overall life pool in the endgame. So even if you had an 80% max rolled Temerity, if you have like a character with 15,000 life, that would give you, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 barrier or so, like a third of your life or something like that. And now you can actually get something like a 12k barrier or so. So this is a pretty massive improvement. Of course, you actually have to heal enough to build that barrier. And well, some builds can do that. And I think for those that have a lot of healing and kind of like over sustain really hard, that can be a really good item now. So keep those around. They said that I think some of the changes will be retroactive. I imagine, for example, like those like effect changes will be, but like the stat changes probably not. I think this is what's going to happen. So you might have to find some of these items again, but it might be worth keeping those around. And lastly, a small buffs to minions in general. They're gonna take reduced damage now from some AoE effects like Fire Enchanted, Obelisks, and Shocklands. So it's like some way of like continuously improving those minions and the minion playstyles, because they're kind of lacking right now. So they're doing that at least for now. And the devs also mentioned that long term they're gonna improve minions in general by giving more scaling options, maybe even more AI options and stuff like that. So it's gonna be quite exciting to see what they're gonna do in the long run. In conclusion, I gotta say, I'm actually very excited for that patch, and I think generally most people that were present when you were watching it were quite happy about it. Definitely seems like a nice round of buffs, especially for the classes and the builds that need it. So there's something like Fireball. I've never even seen a Fireball Sorcerer. Like, it just doesn't exist. So that's kind of cool, and actually got at least me excited to play something like that, and maybe you as well. But for the most part, yeah, the game is going to become a bit more exciting with those Nightmare Dungeon buffs for everyone, in my opinion. It also means that leveling is going to be faster. More density means more monsters, means more XP. I expect that that will definitely shave off something like 10 to 15% of the time needed to get to level 100, which means that something like solo 1 to 100 is like sub 50 hours, probably possible now. So that's going to be quite exciting over Season 2, I guess. And I think that combat in general is just going to feel more fluid in the future with more monsters present, also allowing you, for example, to get more on kill effects, allowing you to maybe chain together certain combos much more easily, stuff like Shadow Step on the Rogue, for example. So let's see how that will feel. In any case, that's it for my summary here. Let me know what you think. Maybe there's something that they missed that you would like to see in the patch, or maybe something that you're really unhappy with. I would be quite curious about it, and let's see what the final patch notes bring. I'll have you covered next Wednesday when the patch notes are out. So hope you enjoyed this one, and see you guys next time.